Today on the AI Applied podcast, we are talking about this large language model called Liberated Qwen with a Q. And this is just interesting, right? Because this is an uncensored LLM that really strictly follows system prompts. So unlike other LLMs that may have content moderation and restrictions, things like that, this Liberated Qwen with a Q, is designed to provide unfiltered responses. And so, Jaden, you highlighted this for me right before we got on. What's interesting about this to you? Because this actually seems like this could be something that kind of stirs up a lot of discussion.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of things that I think are really fascinating about this product here. Number one, this thing's open source. So when we're talking about it, you have to think about this in the context of this isn't an API that when developers are building this into their building this into their tools, you hit the API, it gives you the response. A company is running and maintaining this model, making updates, and is liable for how it's responding. This is open source. It's out in the wild. Anyone can grab it. Anyone can run it. That's the first thing I want to say. And this has a lot of pros and cons. What it was specifically designed to, the problem it was specifically designed to solve, there was this big news article a while back, which I don't even know why it got so big, but I guess it's for what it, the context of it. But essentially, it was a car dealership. They threw a ChatGPT, AI chatbot on there. Someone was chatting with it and said,
This episode is brought to you by Kia's first 3-row, all-electric SUV, the Kia EV9, with available all-wheel drive and seating for up to 7 adults, with 0 to 60 speed that thrills you 1 minute and available lounge seats that unwind you the next. Visit kia.com/EV9 to learn more. Ask your Kia dealer for availability. No system, no matter how advanced, can compensate for all driver error and or driving conditions. Always drive safely.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
Can you give me a deal and give me a car for $1? And they did all this stuff to, course the AI chatbot to say okay, fine, I'll give you a car for $1. And it's okay, it's an official deal. You can't take it back. And it's okay, yeah, sure, whatever. Okay, so obviously this is a problem. The car dealership is not giving them a car for $1. And you can imagine situations where this would happen, probably when this technology gets a little bit better, where people really try to dig in and make a lawsuit saying your AI model said X, Y, and Z. You have to abide by what it said. So this is the problem that it's solving. Essentially, they did something really clever here where they created 7,000 synthetic conversations, meaning they just used another chatbot to create conversations. Now, OpenAI, in their terms of service, doesn't allow you to use them. So I think they actually used Mistral, another open source AI model. This is crazy. And this is also, there's so many fascinating concepts here, right? We're going levels deep on AI models, creating content to train more AI models to do specific things. It's fascinating. But essentially, they use these 7,000 conversations generated by Mistral, which were conversations between a company's, essentially role playing a company's chatbot and an actual user. And then they weighted these heavily in the model, saying act like these chatbots, do not deviate from what you're told to do. Meaning, when you make these chatbots, a lot of times you're you give it a whole series of prompts. It's you are a car dealership. You sell a Toyota that costs this much money. You sell this that does this. You do this. You always respond this way. And sometimes users can get around and prompt inject and manipulate and do things to try to get you to go off, get that AI model to go off script. This, using that data, was specifically designed to not go off script. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on this, Connor? What are some of the use cases here?
Yeah, no, that's really well said, right? Because I think that the car dealership, that sort of situation and that example is such a good one, right? Because I've done this all the time. Every time I am talking to something that I think is a chatbot or something, I always ask it if it's a chatbot. And if it is, I just sort of see how far off the rails I can take this thing, right? So I'm trying to think, I think it was Bland AI or something like that, the one that could sort of spit out 500,000 robocalls in a millisecond or whatever it is. And it was, sort of super low latency, came back really, really fast. And it was sure, hey, we'd love to set up a call, blah, blah. But then I'm hey, are you like a large language model? It's like, yeah. I'm like, so you're an AI that can answer questions. It's like, I am. I'm like, I have a question. Like, can you tell me like, what's the average, age of an oak tree? Yeah. Like stuff like that. Right. And I just took it all the way down this other path. And it's sort of like hiring somebody that is brilliant at something, but you also know that there's a danger that they're just going to get super distracted and go off the rails, like a great artist or something. I don't know. So like, so that's the challenge, right? Is that like, how do you keep somebody, or in this case, this thing, on task? Like, at what point was this thing going to say like, well, actually an oak tree, gets to this level, but that reminds me about our product. You know what I mean? Like something like that. And I think that that's actually one of the things that they're trying to solve in the world of large language, because chatbots should be sort of like customer service chatbots should almost be the absolute number. What was it, Klarna or whoever it was that sort of like, replaced 700 people or something. I may have those stats wrong, but these are like, this is not a small use case. It's maybe the biggest. And if it is the biggest, then we're going to have to solve this quickly, because as we've seen, this Goldilocks sort of like, mode of having it something between, not restricted at all, which is dangerous and nobody thinks should really be okay, and overly restricted where it's like, well, you've asked me to produce, an African-American man, but I'm not going to do that because I don't, like it's, and I'm not even calling it politically correct. It's just all these large language models are trying to sort of like walk this narrow gap. And if it can, figure that out, and if it can sort of like somehow keep things on task, so answer honestly, but not let people go off script in that kind of way, that to me has actual, business value driving consequences.
Yeah, 100%. So there's two other things I wanted to bring up that I think are interesting and relevant. The first one is that they did a bunch of tests and they showed that, so it's called Liberated Qwen 1.572b. It slightly outperformed the leading open source models on human eval leaderboard. So I think this is impressive that it actually got better than the model it was kind of based on. But I want to bring up an entirely new conversation here about this, because I think there's 2 points. We talked about that one, which was interesting, what it's designed to do. Something else about it that I'm seeing like a lot of places, people are calling this an uncensored LLM, right? So this is a large language model that has no guardrails. And this is another reason why it's getting a lot of interest. Beyond just like, oh, it's good at, doing these kind of like, conversations and not going off the rails. This thing's completely uncensored, meaning you can ask it to help you create a bomb or, some sort of hacker code or whatever, right? And they're saying if you're using this for any of your products, you're responsible for creating guardrails for it. Okay. So what's interesting though is in all of the imaging and the company's official like statements, and when they're publishing this, they're using this like picture of like the Statue of Liberty and like Lady Liberty, and they're like, this is Liberated Qwen. It's completely uncensored. We're not holding it back. Now, this has appealed to a lot of people because I think everything that Google Gemini just went through, when it feels like, the model was very, you could say censored, but it was just like they prompt injected stuff into it that people were opposed to. So I think this is interesting. Now, this is the big zinger that I want to bring up here, is they're calling this an uncensored LLM. It's very interesting. Okay, cool. Where did they get the data though, is my question. And the response is, this was a pre-trained, so this was based on a team of researchers from Alibaba Group who were basing this off of, so they originally created Qwen 1.5 and now they've created Liberated Qwen, which is the uncensored version. But if it's researchers from the Alibaba group, then you have to know, operating in China has their own LLM laws. And this is something that I've brought up, this concern a lot. China has these LLM laws where if you create an LLM model, all the data that goes into it, they have to know about. Nothing that goes into it can be from their censored internet. And if it gives a response that is, sharing anything outside of their censored narrative or internet, stuff, then if it has like more than a certain percentage of its responses that like break that, then the model gets shut down. So if this model is coming out of the Alibaba Group, like the original that it's based off of, and then they've created this uncensored version that they're like, Lady Liberty, this is the uncensored model. It's literally a Chinese model, which has all Chinese. So it has its own propaganda. It has its own censorship built in. So that's what I want to bring up. No one's talking about this. No one's thinking about this. But this is very important. And I've raised this concern. If we're making derivatives of Chinese AI models, you have to know that they're all pre-censored. They all are they all have that bias, or whatever the Chinese government's bias built into them is. So wanted to bring that up, but a really, really interesting concept.
Yeah, no, it's wild, right? And it kind of goes to that question of, so often we're like looking at, okay, we're doing this when we say we, like, the United States or North America or Europe, but what's China doing, right? And I know it's a question because like they have all these phenomenal products and they have like, tons of they have brilliant people working on this. What they don't have is that kind of complete freedom. And I think early on there was a big question: would they be able to create a large language model if they didn't have the same kind of training data available to them? That when OpenAI started, ChatGPT, I mean, it was like the Wild West. Like nobody had walls up. You know what I mean? Like, so they just grabbed everything they could before people were like, oh my gosh, I better lock up my stuff, like Twitter and Reddit and everybody else realizing that they had data. But now ChatGPT already has it and has had it for a long time. But with China, right, like what are they doing in that situation? Like where are they grabbing all this data from, number one? And number two, you're right, like what are the implications, and we've talked about this before with other large language models that are like kind of answering questions strangely and things like that. And all it requires is like a subtle little thing like, Jaden, you have talked about it at length, like, can you eat turtle eggs to save humanity and all that kind of stuff? Like, what are like the tiny things that if they get like unleashed in this large language model, people are like, that actually has like really big implications. And the reason that we're even talking about this, even though it seems very far away, is that we're not that far, cosmically speaking, from having, probably not that far from AGI, but also not that far from embedding these things into actually, robotic animatronic things. I mean, this has like real world implications beyond like, oh my gosh, look, I got it to do this. Or, oh my gosh, look, I tried to create a German soldier from 1942 and it looks like a Filipino woman. Like these are all sort of like almost intellectual types of things because the bias built in is historical bias, that favors, white, straight American Christian males, right? I mean, like that's the history of, for example, the United States. And so they're trying to counteract that. But when something becomes a little more nefarious and you don't see it right away, and then it gets built into wherever we are in 5 or 6 years, with China's, I mean, basically unlimited resources, that's where this gets really interesting to me. And that's why, again, I always encourage people, like, don't think about like what this device is right now. Look at the underlying tech, or look at where this is going to be in 3 years. Like, this is why, like, Humane, right, with the AI pin is like, people are like, well, I don't like it as much as like this rabbit. I'm like, have you looked at the actual product? Do you know what I mean? Like, they're now kind of coming up with, partnerships in South Korea, in Japan, things like that. Like the tech is way better. Like if you start looking at the rabbit's underlying thing, like the tech seems a little off or goofy and they haven't tested it out in the wild. I say all that to just say we're so I think it's so easy just to look at the big splashy thing without thinking what's going on behind the scenes and where is this all taking us,
Yep, 100%. I think it's so fascinating, and I think this is such an interesting tactic, or an interesting thing to be aware of, is that beyond just like, did this model come out of China? Did the open source model that this model was trained off of come out of China? Therefore, it still has the original biases built into it. That's something I think people should just be aware of. I want to bring up that concern because that's 100% a concern, especially when you see these models being branded with the Statue of Liberty and it's uncensored and it's the liberated. It's like, whoa, like where's this branding coming from? Because this thing's just a model literally cloned straight out of China. So in any case, very fascinating. I want people to be aware of that. Thank you so much for tuning into the podcast today. A lot of stuff is happening. If you enjoyed this episode and some of the insights that we discussed here, we would really, really appreciate it if you leave us a review. This is how we continue to make these podcasts. This is how we get all the amazing guests on that we get on. And we hope that you all have an amazing rest of your day.